Hi, I'm your host, Jürgen Strauss from Innova.Buzz, and I'm really excited to welcome today to the Innova.Buzz podcast from Brisbane, Australia, Ruth Kent, who helps people and organisations build a more human and effective way to learn by providing a practical framework to help us feel understood and actually to help us feel and understand our own unique learning style. Welcome to the Innova.Buzz podcast, Ruth. It's a real privilege to have you as my guest.
Thank you for having me, Jürgen. It's really great that we've connected.
Excellent. Now, before we dive in, quick note for our listeners, especially if you're new to the Innova.Buzz podcast, each episode's a practical conversation, a candid conversation. It's not rehearsed, it's not scripted, as you'll find out, but it's a real conversation with a remarkable guest just like Ruth. And I like to explore how they create impact, how they build human connection in their work. I aim to unpack their knowledge, their attitudes, their values, and how those translate into action and what we can take away as we listen to that conversation and implement in our own work. So I usually start with a big picture, dig into stories and strategies, and hopefully there'll be actionable ideas that come out of that you can use right away. At the end, we wrap up with our signature buzz round. That's 3 rapid fire questions that I ask every guest. And if you like, think of this as a seat at the table. You're here with me, with Ruth, and we're all learning together. And of course, all of the highlights and links and everything we talk about will be in the show notes, so you can revisit anything that piques your curiosity again later on. Ruth, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I love the way your work moves beyond the pure theory and does provide that real practical knowledge and tasks. And you've actually built a workbook for people to get their hands dirty and truly connect with their own learning styles and their own learning superpower, as you put it. To start us off on the conversation today, can you share what drives you in this mission and the impact you're aiming to make in the world?
Yeah, thanks, Jürgen. I guess learning is a big part of what I do. My background is initially I was a teacher, and I have always loved public health. So when I thought to create my business, I brought the concept of health and well-being in together with teaching and education, and looked at how I could bring my passion for helping people to live better, longer, healthier lives into, how can we combine that with education in the workplace? And that's really where it all began back in around 2014. And I think, as a business, it's really evolved over the years. I initially started with sort of those smaller training sessions in the workplace, but well-being itself, or the concept of well-being, or how people are looked after in the workplace, has really changed a lot over the last decade, and especially the last 5 years. And I've sort of been a part of that whole process, but at the same time spent a lot of time observing and thinking about, well, what's happening now? What are we doing to stay on top of what's happening? And where is it going? So, rather than reacting to what's happening in the moment, like, how can we think ahead and think about what's coming up and what can we do to sort of support people and workplaces in that respect? So it's been a journey, and I think it's been something that I've just loved. It's come out of my own, as I said earlier, my own passion for the support that I bring. And I think I'm the kind of person that has to do something with purpose. So, as long as I'm tied to that sense of purpose and sense of that I'm making an impact and I'm making a difference in people's lives, then I'm really driven to keep on doing what I do. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and there's some bits that we'll come back and revisit again later. You mentioned, especially in the last 5 years, and I'm hearing in that COVID and lockdowns and isolation and all of that, which certainly had an impact on a lot of people's well-being. Talk to us a little bit more about how you pivoted in those days, what sort of challenges that highlighted for you that you're now addressing, and perhaps you started addressing then, or perhaps you were already addressing them?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, I mean, when I think back to that time, it was a mix, and it was challenging for everybody, no matter where we were. And at that time, I just moved to Brisbane, actually, not long earlier, and I just had my second child. So there were the personal challenges of navigating business and raising kids and lockdowns and all of that. But when the pandemic hit, I guess I was one of the lucky few who knew that there was going to be a pandemic coming, having studied public health. So, it was well covered in the decades previously that we were due to have something like this happen. And when it started rolling out, a lot of the measures weren't hugely surprising for me because they were following that public health kind of protocol. So from that point of view, I guess I wasn't as shocked or anxious perhaps as a lot of other people probably were. So that was more from the personal side of things. But work-wise, the fact that I had to sort of deal with the background with my children and all that type of thing, the responsibility and duty of care, a lot of it did fall to women, and we saw a lot of that disparity come out with who was going to be looking after the kids when the schools were closed and all of that type of thing. But thankfully, the work that I do is something which can be done online. So in some respects, there were bonuses because I managed to spread the work that I do. So that concept that we all very quickly had to adjust to have meetings and have all our work basically done as much as possible online was a benefit to me because I was suddenly working with people across Australia, and there was no hesitancy in organisations to do that because it was the only option. So although I was already working with quite big companies and having quite a good impact within that space, like I said, the company was now quite happy to have people across Australia or Asia Pacific sitting in and getting that kind of support. And of course, because that high level of anxiety was there, and it dramatically increased during the pandemic especially, workplaces were especially interested in how they could support people to keep working and stay productive. And a lot of that had to do with supporting their emotional, mental, physical well-being. So that came in quite quickly and was quite strong. And so in some respects, I benefited from that. However, I guess since then, we've also had other changes. We've come out of the pandemic. There's been that kind of what's going on now. Some people are working hybrid. Some people are being called back to the office. So there's a lot of that conversation going on. There's the 4-day work week conversation going on. Right to disconnect has come in recently as well. So there's a lot of things where the legislation is starting to catch up and the workplaces are starting to examine, do we want to keep doing this? I remember towards the end of 2023, a lot of people saying, well, I'm quite happy with this arrangement. I like that I can be hybrid. I get more time with my children. I can contribute at home. So the conversation has just shifted so much. And then specifically the increasing interest in psychosocial hazard management, which is sort of a real hot topic at the moment, is getting more and more organisations interested in, well, what are we doing to support people's health and well-being beyond the wellness program? And I think part of the conversation that I've been really interested in is, bringing in what I consider a public health lens where we can look at things like the population level of, the groups of organizations that we're working with. Because when someone sees, for example, that one company is doing some kind of fitness challenge or something which engages the teams, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to work very well in another organization. And I think taking a step back and applying that more kind of systems level, sociocultural point of view to say, well, who is within the organization? What kinds of things are they needing? What are the demographics of that team? So what are the nuances? And then start putting together programs or supports in place. So we had this real kind of rush to do things in the last 5 years during the pandemic especially. And now I think people need to sort of step back and have a think about, well, we're spending some money on this. How are we doing it, and how can we do it effectively? So the conversations now are being much more nuanced, and we're talking about things like neurodiversity within the workforce, and how can we support their people within the workforce who have some kind of neurodivergent thinking, and if that is if these people are supported, and of course you're being compliant with your legislation, but you're also more likely to get the best out of these people. They're going to feel more connected with the work that they're doing. They're going to have more purpose and be able to be connected more authentically with each other. So yeah, the conversation has changed a lot, and I've just enjoyed being a part of that. Not that I have all the answers, but just that I think it's a really interesting thing to talk about and think about.
Yeah, I think the pandemic there was the immediate change, wasn't there, where everybody started working from home, and that um, opened up the need to work online a lot,
Mm.
which in a business like yours and to some extent mine as well, of course, all of a sudden people all around the world were saying, oh, it's okay to jump online and work with somebody remotely online for this particular service. And so all of a sudden your market became essentially the whole world, depending on what time zones you wanted to work in. And in your case also, you talked a lot about the needs that were coming up, which were sort of needs that you could assist with. One of the things you mentioned there is the idea now that a lot of these programs are being reevaluated as to fit for the culture and the people in the organisation. I know one of the things you do with your learning framework is very much in that light of shaping it to fit with the learner and so on. Talk to us a little bit about how you came across that learning framework, I guess coming out of your teaching background. What was the core feeling you're aimed at putting in place there, and how can that assist an organisation to build skills, I guess?
Yeah, so I guess in terms of the learning, for me, it really comes down to understanding first of all the organization itself. So I don't come in with anything particularly prescriptive at the outset, because I want to get to know, as I said earlier, who is in the organization and what are their particular needs. So that's really kind of going in and doing an audit and having some conversations with the team members and with the leaders, and getting a sense of, well, what is actually going on and what can we measure, from start to finish. So when we sit down in that initial outset, we have that conversation to say, well, what's working right now? Of course we have employee surveys and things like that, but we need to go beyond that and gather more data around what the actual employees are saying. So having focused conversations with them, setting out some points that the organization wants to work on. So again, this is looking at things like, where do they want to go in terms of supporting their staff and well-being. So having a chat with the leaders around setting some kind of vision, some kind of goal towards where they want to go, and then from there sort of working backwards. So what we want to do is have a chat with them about, like I said, you've got the vision, you've got where you want to go, but then what are going to be the first steps? Like, how are we going to measure this, and how can we make this something which is tangible? We also don't want to necessarily do everything all at once. So it's often better to start with one or two areas that you want to work on and really focus and really spend some time building out some effective programs, working on those for 6 months, 12 months, go back and measure the change, and then see if you want to span it out to other programs. Of course, there's a great deal of training and learning within that. So when we look at things like something measurable, like perhaps they're getting feedback that there's a great deal of stress going on, we do of course have to look at the psychosocial hazards. So we have to look at, well, what is the workload management like right now, and having some of those conversations with the teams to understand, well, where is this actually coming up, and who's feeling overwhelmed, and what strategies can we put in place at the very beginning to help with workload, work balance, clarity around the job that the person has, and that type of thing. So setting those in place, and then on top of that, how can we factor in other processes to help support that person or these teams longer term, which involves things like training the managers to have conversations, training the managers to be able to check in with the team members to really understand what's going on with them, and have those check-in conversations before the person is overwhelmed by stress, helping the person to understand their own stress levels and helping them to understand what their avenues of support are when they are under stress, and what might be contributing to that experience. And also understanding that when we are feeling stress, for example, when we come to the workplace, we have the workplace experience, but we also have everything else that we bring to the workplace. So this could be what's going on at home. We may be dealing with something specifically that's going on at home. It's also our life experience and what we've learned to this point so far with how we deal with other people or how we deal with situations. Some of this is immediately easy to sort of quantify and to be able to have some kind of impact on changing or helping that person to make those changes. So it's quite an empowering situation. And some of those things are quite a lot longer term, and the person needs to know where that support is for them, like which roads, which avenues do they have available to them. And then, as I said, when the managers who are really in the middle a lot of the time, they're getting the feedback from the team members, but they're also having to navigate those conversations with people above them. When they understand what's going on and they have a good sense of the people that they're working with, they are going to have a lot more empowerment in being able to support the team members as well. So they really need a great deal of training and understanding, like, how can I support my team? What should I be looking out for? What points do I escalate this? How can I help them to manage their workload? And again, as I said, that having that pathway between upper management, middle management, and the teams really needs to be open and clear. And that comes down to having an organization and a leadership that is open to having those kinds of conversations.
I was thinking as you were explaining that, what's clearly psychological safety in the workplace is a big thing there, and particularly even when you start your process of asking people, what are the issues here? What are you struggling with? Is work and overloading or overwhelming you, or what's going on? That they need to feel safe enough to say, well, here's an issue and here's an issue. How can leaders kind of put some simple actions in place to begin constructing, or to, let's say, no leader wants to have an unsafe environment from a psychological point of view, but how can leaders kind of begin to assess, how safe is it? How safe do my team feel, my employees feel, and how can I make them feel even more comfortable to give that sort of feedback to a third person, which would be kind of a one level, but even better to come to me and say, hey, this really needs to be addressed. This is no good.
Yeah, look, it's really an interesting thing to think about. There's a few things that I would say to that, which to start with, I do think that those conversations need to be had initially, that to get the understanding of it and to be able to, for the leader to understand it. Often these conversations need to be had with an external party, or a safe way for the teams to be able to share and talk without feeling as though they could lose their jobs or they're going to get targeted. I know, and then again, it comes back to, back to sociocultural in many ways, because there are certain people who are going to be quite happy and open in some situations. For example, in a staff survey, which is anonymous. I know back in the day when I used to do staff surveys, I used to think there must be a way that they're going to track this. They must somehow know that I'm the one who did it because I logged in with my login details. So this is always in the back of people's minds. And I think the only way to get around that is to have that safety brought up, and through that, like I said, a third party, a focus group style of conversation where people really do feel safe to air their concerns, and for it to be de-identified, so that it's not brought back and shared directly with the leaders. Because, yeah, like I said, this is the first step that a leader would feel trusting enough to allow that conversation to happen, and know that that is going to contribute to the growth of the organization. I think is the first step for a leader to really understand that that's okay to do. Again, back to the anonymous surveys, we have issues as well with from a sociocultural point of view, because there are some people from certain backgrounds who are not going to feel comfortable or safe to fill out a survey like that. And at the same time, this is just the same way with a focus group. So there needs to be a lot of data taken in at that outset, where people get multiple opportunities to share what's going on. And that information is then centralized and fed back to the leader. In order to do that, the leader first has to accept or understand that they might receive information that they're not happy to hear, or that they might be surprised or shocked to hear. And again, like I said, that they know that this is something that's kind of like the messy middle, or rumbling in the mess of the beginnings, in order to get that clarity and step out of it with some growth. So that would be the first thing that I would suggest for leaders to think about. And if they're feeling strong enough and brave enough because they know that it's going to contribute to better outcomes for their organization, then the next step is really to take that information and start thinking about, well, what vision do we take this information? What vision do we want to grow from this? And from there is where the process begins. In terms of building from there the psychological safety, we talk a lot about role modeling and the culture, and there is a large part to do with that. I think the more that an organization that a leader is aware of themselves, and aware of their own internal processes and what is driving their behaviors and what is driving their thoughts, then they're better able to think about, well, what impact am I having with the people around me? And whether it's intentional or not, as soon as you're a leader of some sort, you're having an impact by way of just the title. So having that sense of self-awareness is going to be a really important step for them. And that takes a lot of self-reflection, a lot of engaging with other people and picking up on, there's the external, I guess, feedback that you're going to get from people, but there's also the interoceptive feedback, the internal awareness that you're going to get. Like, how are you feeling inside? Are you noticing your stomach clenching? Are you noticing your heart rate increasing? And understanding that even without intending, like, words are the first point of communication, but beyond that, we don't just have our body language in the external sense. Everything that we're internally experiencing is in some ways being transmitted to that other person. We're kind of beacons for that kind of information. And so when we're in a situation with somebody else, like it or not, you're transmitting information to that person and they are picking up on it, and then they're filtering it through their own filters, which may or may not create an accurate picture. So being aware of that communication that's happening beyond the language is going to be another really important step for them. It sounds really big, but it's
I mean, for me, there's a couple of key points in what you've said there. There might be more, but the self-awareness part, I think, is a big one, and the communication part. Because when you said if you get that clenching feeling in your stomach or something, when you receive that particular feedback, that to me is a sure sign that, well, there must be something to that, because I'm having a pretty intense reaction to it. And just being aware of something like that, and then rather than going defensive, I suppose, saying, I wonder why I reacted like that.
Mm.
What about that? And exploring some more. And I guess that being able to do that, and then being able to show as a leader to the team that you are kind of really having those kind of reflective moments, and that reflection, whether it's in public or whether it's in the feedback that you then give back to the team, probably helps with that psychological safety
Absolutely.
environment.
Exactly. And it's not that different, although it's entirely a different scenario, but it's not that different to parenting. These days as parents, we're sort of told that the best way to manage our kids or to help our children grow is that when we go through our things, like as we do, that we feel these sensations. We might get angry, we might snap, we might say something, and then later we feel like, okay, that wasn't the right thing to say, and we circle back and we have a conversation with them and we say, look, I was experiencing this at the time. It wasn't the right way for me to have this conversation, or it wasn't the right way for me to talk to you. I'm really sorry about that. But, this is how we're going to move forward. And it's exactly the same in leadership. When you're managing a team, you don't have to have it perfect the whole time, but it's really about that self-awareness. So you've got your internal self-awareness in the moment. And if you're able to really get a sense of how am I experiencing this moment right now within myself, and what thoughts is that creating in my mind, and therefore what actions am I taking as a result of those thoughts and experiences I'm having, and is this actually what I want to happen? You might be able to do that in the moment, but if it doesn't work and you do have a tense moment, or you do reply to an email with that less than collegial point of view, then you're able to circle back to your team member and say, this wasn't a moment that, this wasn't showing my best self. I was aware of this after I sent it, and I apologize for the way that it might have made you feel. And here are the steps going forward that I'm going to take to rectify the situation. So, yeah, it's that vulnerability is built by admitting the authentic self, by admitting that you are a human and you make mistakes and you're working on it too. And this human experience that we're having is something that's universal. We're all having it, and we're not machines, but we are works in progress, and we need to be able to accept that and be able to work together to make better workplaces in that way.
Well, you sort of said a magic word there, machines. Coming back to workplace stress, I suppose one one thing today that a lot of people are worried about is AI going to take my job, and clearly that's something that comes into all the conversations we've had there. Now, I know that you've described AI as a collaborative thinking partner, and I'd really be curious to hear what you mean by that, and maybe even some examples of how you use it in that light. And also moving on from there, I suppose, how people as employees can see it in that light rather than as a threat to their job.
Yeah, look, I think that's a really interesting. I think it's a really interesting time to be a part of. The the way that AI is coming in, and I'm sure I'm not the first podcast guest to talk about this, but it's coming very quickly, and we, for a lot of us, I think we are really surprised at the speed at which it is coming into our daily lives, into our workplaces, into the way that we're working. And I do think that there's a really high level of stress for some people in the back of their minds, thinking about, well, how can we, or what is going to be happening with work and with my job in particular. And there are pros and cons. I think there are many pros and cons to what's going on with this. And some of the pros, when we think about the not just the technological advances and the amazing sort of efficiencies that we're going to get, and the high productivity and all that type of thing, but also the ways that we will probably be able to improve the health and the well-being of people across the world. I think we're going to start seeing things like, because we've got people able to access AI and come up with brilliant ideas and execute them quite easily and quickly, we're going to be able to look at things like remote communities receiving access to health products or health systems in a much easier and more efficient way, in ways that they were never able to before. I can't think of exactly what those would be, but perhaps things like a mobile app that allows them to do something. So we're thinking of people in far off countries, who in micro communities, who are going to be able to engage in the world and get a lot more out of their access to the systems, their water systems, their health or their education systems. So in some ways, we're going to see some leveling up of certain groups, certain populations across the world. But at the same time, I think we're going to see that fear is going to continue. And I think that there's this immediate fear. There's the immediate stress of people within the next couple of years, who's going to lose their jobs first. And then on top of that, we're going to have people wondering, well, what's my purpose? And I know that we're kind of lucky if we are the kind of people who work on laptops, because we can be creative and we can think creatively and come up with new ways of doing things, perhaps create nice businesses and that type of thing. But I think there's a real concern with probably the people in more manual jobs or more repetitive kinds of jobs, who actually do feel a sense of purpose in that work. I know I wouldn't personally, because it's not something that I'm, born to do. But there are some people who will feel that this is their job, this is what they're born for, and they are going to very quickly, probably many of those jobs are going to be taken over with higher, more efficient systems. So, so I guess I'm just presenting the pros and the cons here that I'm sort of seeing, that I've been kind of cogitating on myself. But I think that there's so much to explore, and like I said, the benefits are incredible that could come. But if we're not putting in place some guidance or there's not someone really stopping and asking, well, how can we make this okay for everybody? We might start seeing some real disparities in certain groups. We might start seeing that socioeconomic gap between people who, the thinkers, the laptop warriors, the people who are able to sort of pivot quite easily, highly educated, etc., versus people who maybe have a lower socioeconomic status. They might not be as educated as us, and there may be some economic sort of impacts from that as well. So those are the sort of things I keep in mind. But in terms of the use of AI, like in my own work, I'm just constantly amazed at how it can help me with obviously speeding up. I don't think that's any surprise to anyone, but there's a great speeding up in the work that I'm doing. But also just helping me to provide those external points of view. As a sole trader or self-employed, I'm always thinking in my own lane. And, if I can feed through some concepts or some questions through AI, I'm always given, those alternative points of view. So even as a sole trader, I have a small team, and I think that's what we're going to start seeing moving onwards, is that we will start working as though we have a small team always with us. Someone who's going to be doing the sort of the accounting side of things. That's definitely something I hate. And then there's someone who's going to be your strategic thinking partner, someone who's the forward thinking kind of, where are we going? What's the mission of this business? And so I do see that as a very collaborative approach. And I think we can gain a lot. But yeah, I think we also need to proceed with caution.
Yeah, I think I'm a bit skeptical as to the guardrails. I mean, I see parallels with when the internet first started to develop, and with social media, and governments around the world were just way behind the eight ball. They didn't understand it to start with, so they didn't have any idea of, okay, what are the benefits and what are the risks, and how do we put guardrails in place to prevent those risks. And particularly social media, I guess there's some really bad stories as to what impact that had in a negative sense on some people's lives. So one of the questions I often ask myself is, what do people need to be doing as individuals to learn more, to upskill their communication, their whatever it is that they're capable of doing for their livelihood in this age of AI, and how quickly do they need to be doing this, even if, as you say, it's somebody that finds fulfillment in the routine work that may very quickly be taken over by AI.
Yeah, I think that it is exposure. It's really just an understanding of the exposure to the products themselves, and experimenting and being open and experimenting with them. And I don't think all of society is quite caught up to that yet, to be honest. Like, I think at this point in time, it's still very much a conversation that is only happening in some parts of society. So when you think of internet, probably it was the same thing. It was certain groups of people that embraced the internet at the beginning and understood what it was and how good it could be. And I remember my father showing it to me. He brought me into his work. I don't know, must have been on the computer, one of those big huge computers, sitting on a desk, and he showed it to me, and I just had no idea how to go forward, how to go backwards, and within a year I was probably 17 or 16 or something at the time, and I was right on top of it, and within 6 to 12 months, but because it was quite fast, and this is even faster. But I don't know if all pockets of society have caught up to that yet. And I think one of the best places would be to start with is children. I think children or young people understand it, will be able to get onto it faster, will be able to see their minds are open to all possibilities. So they're not going to be stuck in their way of thinking as much as an adult is. Having said that, I don't know if the education system will be fast enough because, as you said, when you talk about guidelines and that kind of thing, we're hindered by the bureaucracies of government. And as much as I think probably in the background they're working on it, by the time they come out with anything that is effective, we're going to be years and years behind because it just takes a long time. So, yeah, I think if we could just get it in front of people as much as possible to help them to understand, well, when you really sit down, I know that I didn't think about it when I heard about it for a few years. And then when I started paying attention, I was blown away by the possibilities of it. And I really think that we just need exposure, and we need people to understand that first exposure and to really understand what it's capable of is going to start to open up people's minds to, well, what can I do with that next? And it can, like I said, in many ways, it can level the playing field quite easily because those bots, the AI bots, are capable of doing so much with very little, I guess, input from the human. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things, the conversation I see still in the educational field, for example, is, people are cheating, they're writing their assignments with AI and so on. And yes, I'm sure that happens, but people have been cheating for a long time, right? And AI hasn't introduced this element of cheating, right? So that's not, the cheating isn't the issue. The issue is, that's the wrong way to use it. But is there a benefit, and can you use it in a different way? I like your approach of exposure, and I think one of the things I've actually started to learn this myself now, and I think this is something because I jumped on ChatGPT when it first came out in beta and realized its potential, but I was doing pretty advanced things straight away. Recently, I've started doing some basic things, and I think this is something that people could do in every walk of life, and that's, I used to say, if you need to know something, go to Google or go to YouTube, even better, and search how to. So let's say the tap's leaking. So how to fix a leaky tap? Well, you'll find a YouTube, you'll find somebody there that actually shows you step by step how to do it. Now, in that example, seeing it in video is probably a better way to see it, but there might be other examples where you can go, and I've done this, into one of the AIs and say, I've got this problem, how do I solve this problem? And explain it to me as if I've got no idea of this particular topic, and do it step by step so I can follow each step in sequence. And it does that. It gives you very detailed instructions. And I've solved computer problems in software programming that I've got no idea how to do simply by asking questions like that. I say, explain, I've got this error that keeps coming up in this program. Explain how to do it to me step by step. Explain it to somebody that's got no idea of computer programming and has no idea of the systems, and then it'll come back, and 95% of the time I can solve that problem within a very short space of time.
Yeah, and when you were saying that, I was thinking of who can be served by that, and something that kind of came to my mind is somebody living with dementia and how important something like that would be to help them just to live with, the daily process of life and just needing those constant reminders. And I think, when we step back, I guess this is kind of off on a little bit of a tangent, but when we step back and think about all of the possibilities of the ways that it can be applied to support people to live better, it has so much potential. It's just incredible. But as you said, I think exposure is an interesting way to look at it. People need to be aware of it first in order to be exposed to it. And so the awareness, I guess, is the first step. But when that happens, I think people are going to start seeing ways that it can improve lives just so quickly.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Another one that just came to mind, and this might apply to everybody really, and I've used it to plan trips. And one of the things that you can do is ask the AI, say, I'm spending a day in this town. Can you suggest things I should be doing? And usually I append at the end, I said, have you got any questions of me? So if I were to give it that prompt without any further constraints, it would probably come back and ask, well, what kind of things are you interested in? And it might give me a list of options, or it might just let me pick them. So I will generally say, well, I like cultural things, I like historical things, I'm a keen photographer. And it will then often come back and give me, here's some things that are worth seeing in this place. And I've then gone back and said, well, how much of that can I do in a day? And can you plan out a sequence for me that makes sense? So I'm not zigzagging across the town, but I'm kind of doing a sensible loop that saves travel time. And it will do all of that. It's quite amazing.
Yeah. The time saving is just incredible, and the detail, that you could easily miss. I mean, just based on that, we had the Lonely Planet books, but and there was fantastic detail in those books. They're incredible. The contribution of people from around the world, but being able to spend the time and map all of that out is, it's a whole different ball game. So if you do that and that's done in 10 minutes, well, then the question then is, what do you do with your other time? And I think that's where the interesting conversation is, because going to the workplace, we're freeing up time, but what are we doing with the spare time? And you'd hope that people are using that time to either connect and become more connected, or be strategic and creative in their thinking so they can become more innovative. Whether that's happening or not, I don't know. And whether that will happen or not, I don't know. So that's sort of where I have those questions in my mind. Well, what are we going to be doing, to make sure that people come out all right in the end with this? Because, talking about social media and internet, like, there's no doubt that internet especially has been brilliant for people and for humanity. But there have been also drawbacks, especially, I would say, around what came out with social media, and like, as you mentioned. So, there's always going to be pros and cons. I think it's just the awareness of going into it with an open mind, but at the same time, we don't want to be reactive. We don't want things to go wrong and then react. We kind of do want to have some foresight and think, well, what can we do ahead of time to make sure this doesn't happen? And how can we protect people and humanity in this approach as well? So,
yeah, I think what you said there in terms of using the time saving to be innovative, strategic, and create something, and also to build those human relationships. I think there, for me, are the key things to gain the benefit from all these AI tools, and that's where my whole kind of push is around that. Let's do that. And it's interesting. I actually asked one of the AIs recently. I said, how can I use you to be more human and enhance my own humanity and my human connection. And it gave me a very specific action. I thought it was cool. It said, identify one task, one repetitive task that takes you 15 minutes. Then figure out how I can do that for you, because I'll be able to do that for you like that. So once you get it right, you've then saved 15 minutes each time you do that repetitive task. But here's the kicker. It said, now with that 15 minutes, do not move on to the next task. Use it to connect with someone. Use it to write a personalized thank you note. Use it to pick up the phone and talk to somebody. And it gave me a whole list of things. I thought that's really cool.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah,
Mm.
I used it recently when we had some concerns with a particular organization that we are working with, and when I received an email from the organization, I had a gut reaction. I had a visceral, I want to get back to this person right now and give them my thoughts. And that's not the kind of person I normally am, but that's sort of what went through my head, and I wasn't feeling happy. So I went for a walk, I had a deep breath, all of those things. And I thought, all right, I'm going to take this to ChatGPT and ask for some input. And just having that time, first of all, doing that myself, taking my time away and all that sort of thing, but then going back and having this third party, objective and very supportive program that's always on your side. And I said, look, this is the response I got. And I got an immediate sort of consoling, supportive reply from ChatGPT. And I said to ChatGPT, I'm feeling really frustrated with this. And of course, they validated my concerns. And that's all I needed. I could have asked it to be a bit more harsh with me, or to give me that other person's point of view a little bit more, but I didn't need it at that time. I just needed some kind of third party consolation. And then it of course gave me some options that I could do as next steps, which it always does. And I think that, I have questions around using AI for counseling. I know that that's a hot topic as well at the moment, and whether that's a good thing or not. I think there are some pros and cons to that, of course. But I do think that having that sort of objective third party kind of support was really beneficial for me at that time. And I can see why, as an advisor, it could potentially be quite a handy little resource as well. So, that was my little
in those fairly light, I guess, stressful moments, it's probably really good. And the more heavy psychological situations, I'd be a bit concerned.
Exactly.
I had a similar experience recently, and I took it one step further, because at the end, it sort of gave me validation, and it gave me one option how I could potentially respond in a professional and neutral way without burning bridges. But at the end of that, because the outcome essentially was predetermined, I couldn't influence the outcome with any response. I knew that. And so I thought, is there any point in me responding at all? And I was still feeling frustrated and a bit disillusioned. And I thought, what else can I do here? Because I'm having this conversation. I think it was ChatGPT. And I said, how would Jim Jeffries respond to this? And it gave me a response that just had me crying and laughing at the same time. And I thought, well, that was worth the exercise. And it just kind of completely diffused my any residual anger or frustration.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because when you talk about stress management, one of the ways to close the stress loop is to be able to use some kind of shift in your physiology. So if you're using ChatGPT in that way, so someone might go for a run or do some star jumps or listen to some music, but if you can get a laugh and ChatGPT helps you, or any of the other AI helps you to do that, then that's a pretty good outcome. But as you said, then that's that caution to say, well, daily frustrations are great, but as we head into that more sensitive territory, then I guess we have to be more cautious. But yeah, I think when we're at work and we need that extra support, either way, it can be quite useful, and it can be quite helpful potentially for team cohesion and team communication. So we can have people checking in with a supportive AI tool before responding to a customer or to certain people that they're having trouble with.
Yeah, it can certainly help with communicating ideas or, yeah, consolidating ideas so that you can present it in a much more cohesive or insightful or impactful way, I guess is the right word.
Yeah, yeah.
All right. Well, thanks for our conversation so far. I'm just aware of the time. I think it's a good point now to move on to the buzz, Ruth, which is our innovation round, and it's kind of focused on AI these days. So it's I ask the same three questions of every guest, hopefully uncovering a key piece of knowledge or advice or attitude, just something short and punchy, whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
So first is on the topic of innovation. What's the most innovative way you've seen AI used to strengthen human relationships?
I think, I mean, I can't, I'm not thinking of any specific sort of tools or apps, but I think when it comes down to just that simple process of being as we were just speaking about, being a sidekick, I think that there's great value for the person and basically for the connection between the two parties. So going, as long as I think, as I said, that needs to be approached with caution, because I have seen, or I'm sure everybody's been reading about, AI companions, that it really goes pretty far in terms of how connected a person gets, and that can probably go, I think, the wrong way. It's a little bit dangerous, really, to create such a bond with an AI in some ways. But
Isn't there a movie about that?
there's a few of them in there. Yeah, that's right. That is it called She?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah.
What's his name? Anyway, yeah. So I think, but at the same time, I think there's great value, and as long as we're using it with our heads, I wonder in 5, 10, 20 years time if it'll be the same. It will be really interesting to see what's going on at that point in time. But I think just it can enhance connection if it's used the right way, and just having that support to have people get advice before responding can be quite helpful.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Thinking about your own experience, what's the best thing you've done to integrate AI in a way that enhances human connection?
I think for me, look, from my personal point of view, in terms of connection, I would say it's just the enabling of me to get more done. So to get that strategy and that strategic thinking. So this is an indirect way. It's not a direct, me between the app and connection with somebody else, but it's more that I'm using AI to enhance my capabilities, which then enables me to connect more with others, if that makes sense. So it's in all different ways, but particularly in that strategic thinking. So where I plug in some information around a topic that I'm very curious about or that I'm very interested in that's related to the work that I'm doing, and then what are the potential ways for me to support other people. So it will give me, for example, just a very practical example, if I'm putting together a training for change management. So, if there's workplaces undergoing change and they need support in the well-being of their people, what I may have been able to come up with, but with the support of AI, I'm doing it a lot faster and probably a lot better. I'm coming up with the support materials that I'm going to be using to create that connection with them in the training, but then with each other. So these materials are things that are used within the training, like on the spot in the moment, but then the person can take away and keep on using in team connection as well. So I think that inadvertent use where the connection is enhanced because I'm more efficient, I think I'm driving that, but it's still it's something that needs, without AI, it wouldn't be happening to the extent that it's happening now.
Yeah, so that concept of completeness and efficiency at the same time, and then freeing up time to kind of be more present.
Yeah, and also I think it's that collaborative partner, that gives me all points of view and gives me, obviously putting together the work for me a lot faster than I would be doing on my own, but also bringing in points of view or bringing in concepts that I probably hadn't thought of or weren't necessarily part of the original take on it. So that enhances their experience, and then it also enhances my capabilities. Yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, final question of the buzz round. What's the number one thing anyone can do to differentiate themselves today in this age of AI by kind of leveraging their personal humanity and that human connection element?
Yeah, I think I'm sure this isn't the first time you've heard this, but I think that the further we go into this, the more human we're going to be, or the more human we'll have to be. And I think, personally, I think that comes down to understanding yourself first, and that, I mentioned earlier, that interoception, that inner self-awareness, and the inner thoughts that you're having, and how those are driving your behaviors and your interactions. Those are going to become more and more important, and they're going to be leading your ability to connect and to innovate. Also that fluidity and flexibility, that the ability to not be stuck on, this is the way I do things and this is the way that it has to be done, because it's just not going to fit, I think, with such an adaptive world that we're going to be in, a more the AI driven world. It's going to need people who can think quickly and be flexible with their approach, so that they're harnessing AI, so that AI is something that is helping them to become more of what they already are, not replacing them. So leaning into the humanity, leaning into their authenticity, to their connection, those are the things when we step out of it, because if AI is going to be doing all the I don't want to say mundane, but that sort of clerical type of formative work,
stuff.
we need to be human on top of all of that. So yeah,
Yeah,
which is why
excellent.
I love what you're doing.
So leaning into it more, I guess, and I mean it's interesting because you can actually use the AIs to do some of that self-reflection as well and get some insights that you may not have come to without, say, working with a personal coach, which a lot of people won't do for various reasons. One of the reasons, I think, is they're self-conscious about sharing something with another person, and yet with the machine, hey, that's you can tell the machine all kinds of things, and there's just no real consequences, right? And it's not going to judge me either, but it will give me feedback on, hey, this is where I see your strengths and your superpowers, and this is where I see some learning opportunities, and that self-awareness, then you lean in to that more as a unique individual.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure there's so many benefits to that, but I think we're gonna have to really drive the community based connection to balance that out as well, because people will be leaning into that for that sort of support, the kind of support you'd get from a friend, and so we don't want to. Obviously, we don't want to replace that. So I think we're also going to see a real drive in the next 10 years of community-driven, personal kind of one-on-one and small group situations where it has to be in person. Like, the high ticket prices will be for that in-person connection. So, yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see what happens next.
Fascinating. All right. Well, it's been a fabulous conversation, Ruth. Now, where can people find out more about you and the work you do, and maybe even say thanks for what you've shared today?
Yeah, look, they're welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. You'll find me on there. I'm very often chatting about all kinds of health and wellbeing and workplace engagement types of things. You can find me on sunrisewell.com.au, or you could email me at hello@sunrisewell.com.au, and more than happy to have a chat. Love talking about all these kinds of things, and if there are any workplaces looking for support, of course, more than happy to chat too.
Excellent. And we'll have those links in the show notes, of course. Now, as we wrap up, Ruth, what's a specific action you'd like our listener to take out of our conversation today? Something that they can start working on immediately?
Look, I think probably two things, if that's okay.
Sure.
I would say we were talking earlier about AI and how to help people to understand it. That I would say expose someone else to it who you think might not have known about it. So even if it's just sending them, a podcast, or sending them, or sitting down with them and saying, hey, look at this, and just showing them and getting them to have a play with it, just to start spreading that word and having that conversation, so that we can be sure that it's really starting to permeate out into society, so that everybody has an understanding of what it's capable of. I think that would be a great step. And then to counteract that, I would suggest calling a friend, and having a conversation, whether if you can do it in person, set up a date and connect in person, great. If not, get online and have a chat, or get on the phone, make a phone call, which we do less and less these days, and have a real listen to it, to a human voice as well, to balance it out. So I would say do both of those.
Right. And I love that because it kind of connects the technology and the being human and the human connection part, which is what we're all about here in the Innova.Buzz podcast.
Yeah, great.
So thanks so much for sharing your time and your insights so generously today, Ruth. I've really appreciated the conversation, and there's been lots of little gems there to take away. All the best for the future, and please do stay in touch.
Thank you, Jürgen. It's been great to speak with you.